Okay, hi everyone, good morning and welcome to the HMIS monthly training. This month we're going to be taking a look at Looker. This will be a beginner-friendly training, so if you're already a Looker super user, you may know a bit of what we're covering here today. In today's training, we're going to cover exactly what Looker is, how to think like Looker in order to get the most out of its capabilities, when it's best to use Looker versus a canned report or pre-made report, Looker's interface, meaning the buttons and sections you'll see when you open Looker, Looker's models, which determine what kind of data you can explore, how to export the looks you create, and finally, we will cover advanced topics such as creating custom dimensions, table calculations, and visualizations. Don't think that by calling these topics advanced that they are out of your reach. They require some foundational knowledge in order to make the most of them, but once you've worked with Looker on the basics we're covering here today, you'll be able to use the advanced functionality to customize your reports even more. If you have any questions during today's webinar about general Looker functionality or the topics we're discussing, please enter them into the chat box and we will pause to answer them. I'll periodically stop to take a look at the chat box and make sure that we're covering everybody's questions. And if you have questions about a specific report that you've created in Looker or something else related only to your agency, please submit a ticket to the HMIS help desk so that we can assist you personally. We'll get started today by discussing exactly what Looker is. Before we dive in, I wanted to clarify the three terms that you'll see in today's webinar and in HMIS related materials. So Looker, Explore tab, and Data Analysis Tool all mean the same thing. Looker is the name of the company that created and manages the tool we'll be working with today. Looker was recently bought by Google, so if you visit Looker's knowledge base articles, which we'll be sending out some after today's webinar, you'll notice that it has Google branding. You'll see Explore tab in many of 2110C's HMIS materials, such as knowledge base articles. You'll also see Data Analysis tab in our knowledge base articles. That refers to the tab where you can see reports created by 2110C or reports created by yourself and saved in Looker. You'll also see Data Analysis Tool in any Bitfocus created material. The point of this is that all three of these terms refer to the same thing. However you refer to it, Looker is a tool for exploring and explaining your HMIS data. Each piece of data you put into HMIS, such as universal data elements like clients' dates of birth, gender, race, ethnicity, etc., or project-specific data elements such as disability information and income information, can be explored in Looker to gain insight into the clients you're serving and the services you're providing. Exploring can be thought of as the process of creating reports, and explaining can be thought of as the process of using reports to influence decision-making. Our first topic today is how to think like Looker. To get the most out of Looker, you need to understand how it works and what its limitations are. Like any reporting tool, you can only get out what you put into Looker. You may remember something that the HMIS team used to say a lot, which is, if it's not in HMIS, it doesn't exist. And this could not be more true of Looker. Looker has no way of using information that exists outside of HMIS. So it's important to understand what you've put into HMIS before you start trying to extract knowledge from Looker. Now we're going to cover the data analysis process, and here we have a simplified timeline of that process. It begins with raw, unprocessed data, generally in a table format with columns and rows. After the initial analysis, you're left with information, which are descriptions of the data. Finally, after reviewing the information from your analysis, you're left with insight, which puts the information into practice. For more information on this framework, you can check out the article linked in this slide, which will be included in the wrap-up email you'll receive after this webinar. Now we'll look at an example of the data analysis process. The data analysis process starts with data. Here we have a completely made up tiny data set showing us 13 client identifiers in the first column, the client's project start dates, and whether or not the client receives SNAP benefits. This fake data was pulled from Looker after a case manager noticed that towards the end of the month, she tends to frequently work with clients on food assistance. Since some benefits disperse between the 1st and 10th of each month, there may be a pattern to her observation that can be seen in HMIS data, and the case manager thought it would be a good idea to start focusing on connecting clients to CalFresh. Now, looking at the data table in its raw unprocessed form, you're probably not getting much out of it. This is the data part of data analysis. No analysis has been done on this data yet. Upon creating a simple pivot table in Excel, which is functionality that's also available in Looker, but we'll get to that later, we can see that the majority of clients who enrolled during the month of July already received CalFresh, and those with CalFresh benefits enrolled in the project on or after the 15th. This is interesting, but still just information. Insight represents the conclusion of the data analysis process. A case manager thought she noticed an uptick in food assistance needs towards the end of the month and thought perhaps the agency should focus on connecting clients with CalFresh. However, when she analyzed her data, she found that the majority of her clients already receive CalFresh. By using Looker data, she was able to determine that an agency-wide focus on CalFresh applications wouldn't really solve clients' food assistance problems. Most clients enrolling at her agency already receive CalFresh, and for whatever reason, still need food assistance before their next disbursement. Because of the case manager's data analysis, the agency can now strategize ways to best help clients with additional food assistance and resource management. The process we just went over is an example of the kind of thinking you'll have to do before you start to use Looker. In data analysis and data science, practitioners often say that all analysis begins with a question. There are a number of considerations and parameters to take into account when trying to solidify the question you want to answer with HMIS data in Looker. Let's look at an example scenario that we will then use throughout this webinar. In our example, we've identified a funding opportunity to help us serve a population of clients that has not been formally recognized as a priority for our agency yet, clients fleeing domestic violence. The agency is not a victim service provider, which means that clients fleeing domestic violence don't make up the bulk of the clients, but you know you've served enough to need funding for special services for this population. Exploring HMIS data is a great way to get information that can help bolster your grant application. Generally, you'll need to break up your data analysis question into segments for who your question concerns, what interests you about this group, and when your reporting period should be. The who part of our question here is all clients, and there are no additional demographic information to add to our exploration, such as gender, age, household composition, etc. The what part of our question is clients who are fleeing domestic violence. The when part of our question is last year. Putting this all together gives us a clear question that we need to answer. How many clients fled domestic violence into our project last year? This question gives us direction for selecting the fields and parameters we'll need to use in Looker to answer our question. Okay, just going to check the chat box real quick, and it looks like we don't have any questions. So just in case you joined after the beginning of the webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat box, and I will check the chat box periodically to make sure we get to everybody's questions. So now we've reached the Looker interface part of the webinar, and if you're able to log into HMIS and view the presentation at the same time, now would be the time to do that. If you can't log into HMIS right now, don't worry. You'll be able to see everything in the Zoom window, but it can be helpful to follow along so you'll be more familiar with the interface and functionality when you go to make your own reports. Unfortunately, because Looker has been slow for me for the past few days, today's webinar will be entirely based on this presentation, and I will not be able to use Looker live in our examples because the possibility of you guys sitting there waiting 2 minutes for my report to load is just too high. I did notice yesterday that between 7:45 and 8:30ish in the morning, I didn't have many problems and Looker ran pretty smoothly, and the same was true just after 5. So during the day when everybody is at work, traffic seems to slow Looker down a little bit. So keep this in mind when you want to try Looker for yourself, and maybe try to carve out some time at the very beginning or end of day to practice. To get to the Explore tab, click on the menu button on the top right of the page in HMIS. Then click the Reports option. Your menu selections will look a little different from mine since my account is a System Administrator account, but you'll have the Reports button there. Finally, click the Explore tab. When you click on the Explore tab, you'll see a list of models like the screenshot to the right here. Each model has a link that says Open next to it, which will open the Looker report building interface with the data from the model you've selected. Models are sort of like buckets with different fields and functionality available in each bucket. Typically, you will only need the HMIS Performance, Client, Project Descriptor, and Services models. We'll quickly go over each model before we get started in Looker. The HMIS Performance model will meet almost all of your data analysis needs. It requires clients to have a project enrollment during the time period you specify to appear, and since most of you do not collect data about clients without an enrollment, this shouldn't be an issue. But for any times when you do need to analyze data on clients who may not have enrollments, the client model should be used. When you need data about service items provided, you'll use the services model. Finally, when you need data about your agency, project setup, bed inventory, or staff, use the project descriptor model. If you're following along, let's click on the Open link next to HMIS Performance. This is Looker's interface, and this is the screen you'll use to pull data for your data analysis projects. We'll start on the left-hand side of the screen where you'll find your field pane. This pane is where you'll select the fields you want to include in your data analysis project, both the data you want to export and any fields you want to use to filter that data. When you get started in Looker, you should take some time to scroll through the different segments of fields and click on the drop-down arrows to familiarize yourself with the locations of fields for easy access later. You can also search for fields using the search box or filter the field pane for dimensions only or measures only using the selection box under the search bar. We'll cover the difference between dimensions and measures in just a minute. To add a field to your report, simply click on it in the field pane. Moving on to the topmost section is the filter section. This is where you'll determine how to filter the data you want to pull. Looker automatically applies the enrollments reporting period filter, which allows you to filter for clients who were active in whatever time period you specify. The default is in the past quarter. You can adjust these drop-downs to suit the reporting period you need, and make sure to keep in mind that when creating date fields in Looker, you need to add 1 day to the end of your reporting period. For example, if your reporting period is 1/1/2019 to 12/31/2019, you should enter 1/1/20 as your end date in Looker. This is because Looker calculates the end of a reporting period using until before logic. So in our example, we're telling Looker to pull data on clients active until before 1/1/2020, which comes out to 12/31/19. You can use almost any field as a filter in Looker. To do so, find the field you want to use, hover over it, and click the filter button that appears next to it. You can also create multiple criteria for the same field being used as a filter. To do so, click the plus button next to the filter after you've added your first criteria to add additional criteria. Moving down the page, we have the visualization section, which we will get into in the advanced topics section of the webinar. And then we have our data pane. This is where you'll see the data that you pull before you download it to Excel or start analyzing it right here in Looker. While you scroll through the field pane and click on the field selection dropdowns, you'll notice in each field section there are dimension fields in gray that appear first and measure fields in gold that appear after the dimensions. Dimensions make up the bulk of your field options. Dimensions can be thought of as an attribute or characteristic used to group data, such as client age or enrollment project start date. Dimensions are almost always pulled directly from HMIS. The client's unique identifier dimension field pulls the identifier number you see on the client's profile page under the space for their picture. The enrollment's project start date field pulls each enrollment's project start date from the project start date field on the enrollment screen. Measures can be thought of as ways to group data from dimensions. Measures are not pulled directly from HMIS, rather they are a type of calculation using HMIS data. Examples of measures include count of clients and average income change. Let's go back to our example of looking for the number of clients served in the last fiscal year who fled domestic violence directly into the project. We have identified our who, what, and when for this question, and now we have to figure out exactly how to pull that data from Looker. The who for our question asks how will we identify our clients. If the raw data is to be emailed, uploaded to the cloud, or otherwise shared electronically, you should use client's unique identifier or client's personal ID. Client's unique identifier gives you the identifier number you see under the client's profile picture. Client's personal ID gives you the number at the end of the URL when you are viewing a client's profile. And selecting client's personal ID also creates a link directly to the client's profile that you can click on in Looker. Client's personal ID is useful for reports that are meant to be used for cleanup and identifying data quality issues. The what for our question asks what are we interested in about our group of clients, whether they fled domestic violence right before entering our project. Luckily, this is a HUD standard data element and is easily accessible in Looker. We will make sure to use the entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence dimension. Finally, the when for our question is what is our reporting period? We are interested in clients who enrolled in the project in the last fiscal year, which is July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2020. We are not interested in clients who were active in the project during that time, so we will set the enrollment's reporting period filter to any time, and we will enter our date range into a filter using the project start date dimension. Remember in Looker, we will have to add an extra day to the end of our reporting period, so our project start date filter will be 7/1/2019 to 7/1/2020. You may have noticed in the what section of our field selection, I said entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence. This is because fields that collect the same information can appear on multiple screens in HMIS. The screens are organized into sections in the Looker field pane, and these are the most common ones you'll be using as you start out with Looker. Fields in the client section generally pull from the profile page. The entry screen section contains HUD standard data elements that appear on the entry screen, and the entry custom section contains custom fields our COC has added to the entry screen, such as employment status, state you were born in, and any fields that are specific to private funders, such as CFCOC. The update exit screen section functions the same as the entry screen section in terms of where you'll find HUD standard data versus custom data, but they pull either from the status update or annual assessment screen or the exit screen. You can identify a field section by looking at the non-bolded part of the field description once you've added it to the data pane. If you're following along, let's go to the Explore tab now and see if we can recreate this report. Try setting up the reporting period filters and adding the fields you see here to your data pane. As you're adding the fields to the data pane, think about other types of reports that might be useful for you to export from Looker. You might be familiar with the Program Details canned report that you can access on the Reports page. This report pulls all of a client's information from a certain screen for you, which can be very useful for a thorough review of enrollments, but maybe you don't always need quite so much information. Maybe there are a subset of fields you frequently work with, whether for reporting on your agency's activities or for data quality cleanup that you can add to a custom Looker report so you'll always have exactly what you need. Back to our example, downloading this report and analyzing your results in Excel would be an easy way to explore your data if you don't plan on exploring this particular data very often. After we look at how to analyze this data in Excel, we'll look at a few ways to put in some work upfront in Looker to make this data more accessible in the future. Now we'll briefly go over how to export your data to Excel and some basic Excel tips. To download your report, click on the gear icon in the top right corner of your Looker screen, and then click Download. When you click Download, a pop-up screen will appear with options for your download. First, you'll want to change the file format to Excel spreadsheet for the example we're working on now, but you'll also see that file formats such as PDF exist, which can be useful when working with visualizations. Then, this is optional, but I find it's good practice to change your results option to as displayed in the data table so that your column headers match exactly what you see in the data pane. This will be especially important if you create a report that uses the same field from the entry screen and the update or exit screen. For example, if you use the client's income fields and you don't have the as displayed in data table option applied, you won't be able to tell the difference between your entry income, your update and exit income when you download your report. Generally, you can leave your values as formatted. This means your download will be an Excel file that knows how to differentiate a text field from a date field from a currency field. Finally, you'll want to change your limit to all results to make sure you can see all of the data that has been captured by your filters. If you leave this as results in table, you will only download the number of rows that appear in your preview window, which is defaulted to 500. When you're done with your download options, click the download button and save your Excel file somewhere on your computer. Now we'll go over some Excel tips for analyzing your HMIS data. These tips are not unique to reports exported from Looker, the Explore tab, or the Data Analysis tab. You can also do this with any canned report that you've downloaded from the Reports page as an Excel file. And just to note, all of the data you'll be seeing today comes from the training site and has been made up. No actual client data will be shown. Once you open your Excel file, you can apply a filter to your report and use filters to look at your clients who fled domestic violence directly into your project. To do that, click the Filter button in your Home ribbon and click Filter from the drop-down menu that appears. After you click Filter, you'll notice drop-down arrows will appear in the header cell of each column. To filter any column, click the drop-down arrow that appears next to it. For our example, we'll want to see how many clients fled domestic violence immediately prior to project entry. To do that, we'll click the drop-down arrow next to the entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence column. Then click Select All to clear the filter selections and click Yes to only see clients who answered yes to this question. The result of our filtering process shows us that we have 4 clients who enrolled in the project immediately after fleeing domestic violence. Another Excel-based way to arrive at this number is to use a pivot table. To start, click the Insert tab at the top of your screen, then click Pivot Table. There are a few different ways you could organize your pivot table to show you the number of clients in our report who fled domestic violence. But in this example, I've put the entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence field in the row section so that we can see the distribution of no's, yeses, and blanks. The values are a count of the client's identifiers. The Excel methods we've just gone over work best for when you need to accomplish something with a specific client's records, rather than get information that doesn't deal with the individuality of clients. You might want to export our example report here if you want to identify the clients who fled domestic violence into your project in order to ensure they're receiving referrals or counseling or legal services. But if you're just looking for a metric, you can follow the steps we'll cover in a minute for analyzing your data in Looker. Now that took a pretty long time for our single question. There are easier ways to answer questions about a group of clients that is based on a HUD data element in Looker. Going back to the report we made earlier, we can move some things around to make answering our question a lot easier. This time, our reporting period filters are exactly the same. Enrollment's reporting period filter is set to any time, and enrollment's project start date is set to fiscal year 2019-2020. Remember how earlier we learned you can use a field as a filter? Now we're going to do it. In our example, we're not really concerned with clients who were not fleeing domestic violence because we just need a count of clients who are fleeing domestic violence for our grant application. You might be interested in all clients' relation to this question if you wanted to look at the proportion of clients who have the attribute you're looking at or the experience. We'll cover that in the advanced topic section coming up. For now, we've used the client's number of clients measure, which you can find in the clients field section. When your field sections are collapsed in the field pane, you can see a count of how many fields are currently being used from each section. Here we have one from the clients section, which is the number of clients measure. We have two from the enrollment section, which are the enrollment's reporting period filter and the enrollment's project start date. And we have one field from the entry screen section, which is the currently fleeing domestic violence field. Now you'll want to save your look to be able to come back to it later and not have to redo all of this work. Click the Save Look button at the top of the page and to save and name your look. The look will then be accessible on the Data Analysis tab under System Reports. This functionality is only available to users with agency administrator type accounts. Okay, before we go on to advanced topics, I'm just going to check the chat box for any questions. And it looks like we don't have any, so hopefully everything is super crystal clear. All right, so now we're going to go over the advanced Looker topics of custom dimensions, custom measures, table calculations, and visualizations. Before we get started, it's important to note that you shouldn't feel intimidated by these topics. They seem very overwhelming at first and like you could never possibly use them effectively, but these topics just take time, patience, and curiosity to learn. If you're just starting out with Looker, there's no need to even think about using any of these features until you're more comfortable creating your own reports like we just did, but you should still stick around to see what's possible in Looker. This webinar's recording will be available on our YouTube channel for future viewing, and we will be releasing a written version of this training for you to refer back to as well. Custom dimensions, measures, and table calculations allow you to dive deep into your HMIS data and can save you a lot of time if you need to regularly report on the same metrics. Custom fields are only applied to the report you're working on when you create it. In order to use a custom field that you create on multiple reports, you'll need to copy the code for each custom field into a text or word processing document and save it on your computer or a cloud-based service for future use. It's also important to keep in mind that since custom fields are created by individual users, they are not HUD standard, they are not monitored by 2110C, and as such, they are not quite as reliable as the built-in fields you'll find in Looker. They are powerful tools, but require a deep understanding of HMIS data to be used effectively. Each of the custom field functions are related, but meet different data analysis needs. Custom dimensions should be used when you want to combine one or more dimensions. Remember, custom dimensions are essentially attributes or characteristics and make up the bulk of the fields you'll find in Looker. An example of a custom dimension could be female clients entering the project from a place not meant for human habitation. This custom dimension combines the client's gender dimension and the entry screen residence prior to project entry dimension to let you see the specific population. You can combine dimensions that are not in your report into a custom dimension. For example, you can select the project's full name dimension and your custom female clients entering the project from a place not meant for human habitation dimension as the only data you'll see in the data pane, and the dimension will still calculate based on the client's gender dimension and on the entry screen residence prior to project entry dimensions, even though they do not appear as columns in your report. Custom measures should be used when you want to create a metric based on dimensions. We'll revisit our example data analysis question of how many clients fled domestic violence to our agency in the past fiscal year with a custom measure that will calculate the answer for us. Like when creating custom dimensions, you can create a custom measure based on dimensions that are not present in your report. Both custom dimensions and custom measures can be used as filters in your report. Table calculations should be used when you want to calculate something based on data you've already pulled. Table calculations can only use data that exist in your report as columns or selected fields. Table calculations cannot be used as filters in your report. To create a custom dimension, click the Custom Fields drop-down, then click New, then Custom Dimension. As an example, we're going to look at female clients who are enrolling at your agency with a residence prior of project entry of place not meant for human habitation. Custom dimensions require the use of Looker's proprietary syntax, which is somewhat similar to Excel's equation syntax. So if you've ever created a formula in Excel, Looker's syntax should look pretty familiar to you. It's not exactly the same, and it will require some experimentation, but it's pretty similar. When you open the Custom Dimension panel, you'll see a place to name your custom dimension. Try to make this as descriptive as possible so that you know what it is later. Next, you'll see a drop-down menu for your dimensions formatting. Usually, the default formatting will work well, especially if you are outputting whole numbers or text. If you are outputting a date or currency, you can adjust for this in the formatting dropdown. The Custom Dimension Expression panel is where you will create your custom dimension. This is similar to the formula bar in Excel. This process will require a lot of experimentation and reference to Looker documents such as the Operators and Expression article. After today's webinar, we will send a wrap-up email that will include links to helpful materials that will assist you in getting started with custom dimensions. The example we're looking at here is categorizing clients based on whether or not they are female and entered the project from a place not meant for human habitation. We start off with an if expression followed by our first parentheses. Since we have multiple criteria in this expression, we need to add a second parentheses that will hold in our criteria before we move on to our outputs. Start searching for your dimensions by typing a $sign followed by a curly bracket. This will bring up a list of dimensions which you can keep typing in to narrow down further. I typed gender to find the static demographics gender field and entered =0 to indicate that I only want to look at client records where the gender is equal to 0. This number refers to the field number listed in the HMIS data dictionary. Some fields in Looker require the data dictionary's field numbers, and some require the actual text of the response option you're looking for. Unfortunately, this will require trial and error to figure out. Looker is releasing a data dictionary function sometime in the future, and we're hoping that Bitfocus will make use of it. That way we know which fields require which options. In the meantime, if you aren't getting the results you need, make sure to try both the HMIS data dictionary field number and the response option text. If you have trouble with this, or anything else related to Looker, please always feel free to enter a ticket with the HMIS Help Desk. We really like helping HMIS users figure out solutions to Looker problems. I typed AND to indicate that there is an additional criteria our results need to meet and repeated the process for the residence prior to project entry field. The 16 you see here is also from the HMIS data dictionary and corresponds to the place not meant for human habitation response option. I closed our first parentheses to indicate that I'm done with my qualifications or criteria and ready to move on to our outputs. For this example, I've just used yes and no, but you can use any text here. I used yes first to indicate that if my criteria are met, Looker should output yes for that row, and no is second to indicate that the row does not meet my criteria. You could also use a code such as FPNH, where I used yes to indicate that the row belongs to a female client entering from a place not meant for habitation, if you were to use this custom dimension in a larger report where more context would be helpful. When you're done with your dimension pane, make sure to click Save to save your custom dimension. Using the custom dimension we just created as a field in the data pane will yield results like this. From here, you could complete analysis in Excel like we discussed earlier, use this custom dimension as a filter, or use it as part of a larger report. Moving on to custom measures, you can create a custom measure by following the steps we just used for creating custom dimensions by clicking on New and selecting on Custom Measure from the Custom Field section dropdown. You can also click the gear icon next to any field to create a custom measure based on that field. After selecting the gear icon, you'll select the type of measure you want to create. Before creating a custom measure, however, make sure to look through the list of measures that already exist in Looker. Bitfocus has added many measures since we recorded our last Looker training videos, and chances are the measure you need already exists. If what you need does not exist and you're having trouble getting your custom measure to do what you need it to do, again, please always feel free to enter a ticket with the HMIS Help Desk. Our last custom field type is table calculations. Since table calculations require all of the fields you want to calculate with to be present in your report, table calculations should be used when you want to narrow in on data you've already pulled. In this example, I've pulled a report using the program's full name field to show me the name of the agency and the project on each row, and the enrollments count measure to show me the number of enrollments in each project. I've also added the entry screen total cash income to show me the total amount of income recorded at entry for each project. I can use a table calculation to show me the average amount of income at entry by opening the table calculation module, which is the same process that we just went through for the custom dimension and custom measure, and enter my calculations here. First, I'll name my calculation something descriptive. Then I'll select the formatting that I need. In this case, I changed the formatting from default to US dollars with cents. Then I'll enter my calculation by dividing the number of enrollments by the total cash income in my report. When I click Save, a new column titled Average Cash Income at Entry will appear in my report. Now we've gone over the 3 options for custom fields in Looker, and it's time to start thinking about visualizing the data that we've collected. Visualizations are ways to show our data other than with plain numbers or text. Visualizations should be used with aggregate data. Here I've modified our first example question of clients entering our project directly from a domestic violence situation to show aggregate data. This looks similar to the pivot table we created in Excel. I did this by adding the entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence dimension and the count of enrollments measure into the data pane. You can now see how many enrollments answered the question by each of the response options. I also modified the reporting period so we would have more data to work with as we look at the visualization. In order to visualize this data properly, we need to think about what the data actually entails. We know that only adults are required to answer the question asking if they've ever experienced domestic violence. We could add a filter for adults only to narrow our data down so that only enrollments where the question is required will appear. But we also know that only clients who answered yes to have you ever experienced domestic violence are asked if they are currently fleeing domestic violence. This is an even more accurate way to filter our data down to only see enrollments where the question applies. Let's add a filter for entry screen domestic violence is equal to yes to our data. Now we can choose a visualization. Click on the visualization dropdown to open up the visualization pane. In order to look at the context of all of our clients who said they had experienced domestic violence at some point in their lives and determine how many of those were fleeing domestic violence currently, we could select a pie chart which shows us the percentage of each response option. When using a pie chart, keep in mind that it can be difficult for people to accurately gauge the size of the pie's slices, so it's important to always keep the data labels visible on a pie chart. It's also recommended to not use a pie chart if you have more than 4 categories of data to visualize. The dot menu in the visualization pane opens up a drop-down with even more visualization options. You can select Sunburst from this drop-down to see a type of pie chart with an empty space in the middle, sometimes also referred to as a donut chart. In order to see how common each answer is, we could use a bar chart which will rank the response options for the question from greatest to least. A bar chart is a reasonable choice for most data analysis you'll be doing in Looker. It doesn't work for everything, but when you've got categorical data, it's generally a good jumping off point. If you need to keep track of single metrics, the card visualization might work best. Here we've added a filter to only show us clients fleeing domestic violence since we're focusing on that number. And with our new updated reporting filter, now we have 10. There are many resources available to help you choose the best visualization for your data. This one from the Financial Times is particularly thorough and covers many visualization options that are not even available in Looker, but could help you in your data analysis and visualization journey in software like Excel, Tableau, or Power BI. Each column represents a type of data, such as categorical, overtime, parts of a whole, etc. And underneath each title are the visualizations that work best for that type of data. I know this screenshot is basically impossible to read, but it shows how much information is packed into this graphic. We'll be sending a link to this and many other resources in the wrap-up email after this webinar, and we will also post them in a knowledge base article for future reference. I'm going to quickly check the chat. It looks like we don't have any questions, but this is all of the information we have available for you today. If you have any questions about Looker's functionality or anything else you're wondering about, please feel free to enter that into the chat box. Or if you have a specific question about a report you've created or something else that just applies to your agency, you can submit a ticket to the HMIS help desk and we'll be sure to get back to you. So I'm going to stick around for a few minutes to see if there are any questions about what we've gone over today, any questions you have about Looker or data analysis. Will this training video be uploaded on 2-on-1 for future for future reference? Yes, we will be uploading the video to our YouTube channel. Will you be sending an overview via email? Yes, we will be sending a wrap-up email that contains a link to the recording, hopefully a link to the written training that we're going to create based on the information we've provided here, and some links to other helpful resources like the data visualization graphic we were just looking at, some Looker documents that can help you get started creating custom dimensions and measures, and probably some other Looker documents.